Prime Minister Shri Narendra Damodar Das Modi.
मैं नरेंद्र दामोदर दास मोदी ईश्वर की शपथ लेता हूं कि मैं संघ के प्रधानमंत्री के रूप में अपने कर्तव्यों का निर्वहन करूंगा।
Hello and welcome to this edition of Political Capital, the show where Delhi meets Dalal Street. I'm Siddharth Zarabi. It's been 6 months to the day that Narendra Modi was sworn as India's 15th Prime Minister. What's changed in the last 6 months? While the economy has been slow to get off the ground, the government has received a massive dose of good fortune with a sharp drop in the price of oil, for instance. The reform process has kicked off on a measured note. While a number of executive decisions have been taken, those requiring legislative approvals have been harder to come by. Matters stuck in Parliament. A number of big-ticket programs have also been announced, including the Make in India push for manufacturing. Make in India, another word for Swadeshi perhaps. Prime Minister Modi has invested a lot of time and has achieved unexpected and successful success as far as foreign policy is concerned. He has quoted global powers as well as several other people. He's been keeping a close eye on the economic benefits for the country. And joining me to talk about the Modi government's report card at the 6-month mark is Mr. N.K. Singh, senior leader of the BJP, former Rajya Sabha member and a veteran bureaucrat who has spent many years in the PMO and tracking the way Delhi and India works. Manish Tiwari, senior Congress leader, former Union Minister for Information and Broadcasting and one of the saner voices from the previous government. And finally, Shaurya Doval, director of the India Foundation, a think tank that is closely associated with Prime Minister Modi's economic agenda. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me here. Let me go across to Mr. Singh first. If you can hear me, sir, 6 months to the day, a new government in place, massive expectations, Achhe Din, a lot of talk about resetting India, both internally and as far as the world is concerned and India's relations with the world go. How would you describe the situation at the 6-month mark at this point of time?
Well, very frankly, I have written a long piece on it today, Siddharth, in today's Hindustan Times, which evaluates the 6 months of Modi government. And I think that broadly speaking, what I have concluded is that very important, credible policy measures have been taken. And they have no doubt been facilitated by favorable exogenous circumstances. But the opportunity of these favorable circumstances have not been missed. The opportunities have been really fully grasped in terms of deregulating fully the petrol prices, in terms of rationalizing subsidy, in terms of initiating a program which will make a qualitative difference to medium-term economic growth of India, in terms of the signals which have been sent for much better partnership with states, in terms of reigniting the stalled projects which had been frozen in time, and speeding up procedural and other changes, including administrative changes, which would really get the bureaucracy out of its deep slumber into a path which would make gainful gains in high-quality implementation and altering the way in which processes and procedures have so far been worked to India's disadvantage.
Right, Mr. Singh. That's a pretty nice summation of the 6-month agenda. Manish, you heard Mr. Singh. You were vested with trying to explain to the people of India the job that the UPA was doing. And today I'm asking you to tell the people of India the job that the NDA has done in the last 6 months. How do you see it?
Well, I have a great respect for Mr. N.K. Singh and for both his intellect and erudition, but respectfully, I would like to disagree with him. If one thing has characterized the last 6 months of this government, it is the fact that it's been very high on rhetoric and extremely low on substance. And I think nothing characterizes it more than what you said in your opening statement, that the economy has been slow to take off. And the reason why the economy has been slow to take off is primarily because there are no new initiatives or any fresh thinking which this government has been able to bring on board. In fact, because of the fall in crude prices, which may not last if the OPEC decides to cut production, which may happen later this week, unfortunately there is nothing which this government has to tell in terms of its performance on the economic front over the past 6 months. Headline inflation may have come down because crude prices have come down, but food prices continue to prevail at an all-time high. Insofar as foreign policy is concerned, there is nothing which sums up the failure of this government more than the SAARC summit which is taking place in Kathmandu. From inviting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to the coronation of this government, to a situation where both the Prime Ministers are not even prepared to shake hands with each other, shows a complete lack of any policy initiative by this government or an attempt to even try and keep the course of Indo-Pakistan relations steady. Insofar as internal security and other issues are concerned, I can delineate on that later in the program. But as I said, if there is anything which can sum up the performance of this government in the past 6 months, it's high on rhetoric, very low on substance.
Thanks, Manish. High on rhetoric, very low on substance. That's Manish Tiwari there, Shaurya, as always, making his arguments very clearly. The fall in crude prices, really, something that the Modi government didn't have anything to do with. The possibility that the OPEC could well cut back on production and that would reverse this high food prices, and a foreign policy which Manish believes that, and the Congress believes, has not delivered on the one key question, that is Pakistan. And in 6 months, we have moved a full cycle. That's the Congress impression of things. What's your impression at this stage?
I would actually tend to slightly disagree with Mr. Tiwari. And I would limit myself to just 180 days of performance because that is all that we are evaluating.
Right.
And when you said that the economy has actually taken off to a slow start, I beg to differ because I'm not sure on what basis have you made that conclusion. If you look at the numbers, the GDP has grown at 5.2% this quarter, vis-a-vis the same performance last quarter. So is that one metric that we should be looking at?
Okay.
What is the GDP growth?
Okay.
Is the industrial, the IIP, it has registered an improvement. Is that one of the metrics that we should be looking at in deciding whether the economy is indeed growing slower or faster? And I would like to then ask the question that is this rhetoric or are these actual facts around which we will base our discussion? If you look at the total FDI that has happened in India, which has gone up by about 45%, up from about $7 billion to about $12 billion for the same corresponding period.
Right.
Is that one of the metrics that we are going to look at? If you look at the overall investment climate, which part of it which may be reflected by a 30% increase in the stock market, is that the metric that we will be looking at? So I'm happy that we can try and break down from the generics to specific economic parameters to decide whether in the 6-month period compared to either we can decide whatever in a relative benchmarking, what do we compare it to? If we decide to compare it to the last 6 months of the last year, the first 6 months of the UPA government, or whatever metric we want to, that whether there has been an improvement in economic performance or not. And then coming back to what Mr. Singh was saying, that there are a whole host of measures that we can, on whom the jury is yet to be out, whether those things that are being put in place, the architecture that's being put in place, whether that will reflect performance at the end
going forward. That's a good point, Shaurya, and let me go back to Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, you heard Manish Tiwari speak, and I'm sure you want to respond to that. But before you do that, sir, a more fundamental question. Are we falling in the trap of measuring expectations on a daily basis, on a 180-day basis, 365-day basis, when the tone and tenor of this government really has been to say that we will do things in the long term? And the fact is, you have to give a government, a new government, some days, and whatever may have happened internationally is good news. So why deny India the pleasure of falling crude prices?
No, I share your view. In fact, 100 days, 6 months, these are all artificial time slices in the broader picture. And of course, if embedded in the economic strategy is a desire to bring about societal changes, then we all know that societal changes, social attitudes, embedded prejudices, these are not malleable to short-term stimuli. So I think those are very difficult processes which have begun, and I think that it would be somewhat unfair to just take a time slice of 6 months or so. But I agree with Doval on two other things. Let me first respond to Manish, who has been among the most soft-spoken and among the more saner spokesmen of the Ashe regime. Let me ask really, Manish, if I could, that you go back to figures of 2007 and 8. 2007 and 8, India's GDP was looking good. India's tax buoyancy was looking high. The fiscal deficit was within manageable limits. It was an enormous opportunity which the UPA government had to retire public debt, to make the tax regime less adversarial, to bring about changes which were of an abiding and structural nature. What did it respond to? Instead, it indulged in unbelievable fiscal profligacy, wasted that huge opportunity of 2 years which it had, in terms of which it could have brought about a qualitative change in the trajectory of India's growth. That's something which this government has learned.
Manish, you want to come in on that?
And let me just add one sentence.
Sure.
So I think what this government has done is taking advantage of the favorable exogenous circumstance to bring about the fundamental changes in the system.
Manish, what Mr. Singh is saying very politely is that Pranab Mukherjee, the Honorable President of India, basically did not spot the opportunity, gave a stimulus where none was needed, did not take harsh steps as far as the petroleum subsidies was concerned, and that led to the downfall of the economy in subsequent years. Can you shy away from that criticism, even as you sort of say that the Modi government is riding a wave that it has nothing to do with?
Well, let me deal with the issues one by one. First of all, are 100-day or 180 days or 260 days deadlines artificial? No, in a democracy they are not. Because the fact is that you live in a new information age, which is not only characterized by 24/7 television, which is characterized by a new media which is hyperactive on a second-to-second basis. So therefore, every government has to deal with the fact that expectations and performance is now going to be measured on a daily basis. Now, coming back to the specifics, you know, what Mr. N.K. Singh said is absolutely correct. The UPA did deliver over a period of 10 years, 7.9% growth of the GDP, which by no manifestation is a mean growth, given the fact that 2008 that Mr. N.K. Singh talked about was also the year when the great economic meltdown, you know, the first cataclysmic event after the Great Depression of 1930s took place. Now, that's a historical fact which we cannot wish away. And even in that particular year, the GDP grew at 6.7%, and for the subsequent 2 years, it grew at 9 and 9.5%. Those are also facts which cannot be wished away. But yes, we took a hit when the Eurozone crisis came in. So therefore, whether it was a missed opportunity or they were uncharted waters which the government was trying to navigate because the economy is globalized. And also, he talked about structural reforms. Who held up the structural reforms? It is a very trenchant opposition which held up structural reforms. Direct taxes code could not go through. GST was linked to extraneous political concessions which were being demanded on the criminal side of jurisprudence in order to allow it to go through. So when you have such linkages which are created, obviously it has an impact on the economy. And coming back to the numbers which Mr. Doval talked about, you know, Mr. Doval was absolutely very eloquent with regard to the second quarter. But what about the first quarter? The economy started going up in the first quarter of 2014. And for the better part of that first quarter, still had a UPA government in office and not an NDA government. So therefore, there is a lag effect of the measures that were put in place after Mr. Chidambaram became finance minister in 2012. And what you are seeing is really the lag effect of that catching up, not any new initiatives which are being taken in this government. In fact, over the past 6 months, can this government point to a single new policy initiative which they've introduced in the public discourse, which wasn't already there and which wasn't stymied by the NDA when it was in the opposition?
Okay. Manish, Shaurya wants to come in on this point about no new policy measures. I noticed you were getting very agitated about it. What do you have to say?
I'd like to just point out one such initiative, the Jan Dhan Yojana scheme. The Jan Dhan Yojana scheme, as on November 25th, 2014, has mopped in 7.9 crore people into the banking circuit who are not available. But not only that by which its performance should be measured, the fact that it has roped in 6,500 crores of savings that were outside the banking system and are now available to the economy is an achievement in itself. So it's a specific point to Mr. Tiwari that, and I can name a whole host of other things, but this is one measure where not only was action taken, but a deliverable output is available to negate what he is saying, that there has been nothing that has been done in the last 6 months.
Manish, the Jan Dhan Yojana, a clear ramp up of financial inclusion, which the UPA only spoke about but could never boast of such numbers. That's also a hard reality.
Well, let me tell you what is the hard reality. The reason why financial inclusion was able to come to fruition was primarily because the UPA laid the foundations of that with Aadhaar. So you had a platform which was created, you had numbers which were generated, numbers which were linked to bank accounts. And in fact, I'm extremely surprised that my good friend points to the Jan Dhan Yojana, because there is nothing new, unique or novel about the Jan Dhan Yojana. In fact, it is a carryover of financial inclusion which has been attempted, and maybe Mr. NK Singh, if he wears his economist hat, can bear me out, by every finance minister going back 20 years. So therefore, if that is an example of new or fresh thinking, I'm afraid, I'm sorry, I will not be able to buy that.
No, but the numbers were never achieved. So there is no taking away from the fact that the UPA
well, the numbers got
spoke about dozens
primarily
of things.
The numbers, my dear friend, let me point out that let us measure the Jan Dhan Yojana 1 year down the line. Let's measure it 1 year down the line, primarily because of the fact that those accounts which have been generated, how many of them actually remain active, how many get atrophied. So therefore, it's too early in the day. Even if you
Shaurya, he's throwing a challenge that let's measure the Jan Dhan accounts 1 year later as to what they are.
Absolutely. I would like to, actually, that's a good point. So now we are saying that we will extend the performance metric from 180 days to 365 days in advance.
Okay.
Absolutely fine. We should actually measure the performance of this government, of how the Jan Dhan Yojana scheme performs 365 days. We should also add another metric that in case in these next 365 days through this Jan Dhan Yojana scheme, there is a saving in the loss of direct transfers to the people.
But Manish, and the Congress point of view is that the Jan Dhan Yojana has been possible only because of the Aadhaar program that they put in place.
The question, see, this framework of discussion is wrong, because this is a government and this is a country in continuity.
Okay.
There are steps that have been done in the past and there will be steps done in the future. The question that I was asking,
that's a very fair and
I was
important
only
point.
responding to
Shaurya,
the question.
That's a fair and important point about continuity in government and continuity in policies, because politics should not mean that you junk the past. And I think that's a point well taken, and that's a message that the BJP, after its initial few days in government, realized, and that's why you saw this different view taken on Aadhaar at the highest levels of the government. It was almost close to being shut down. But Shaurya, I want to turn this discussion to a slightly different subject, and this is by going to across to Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, FDI decisions, the defense decision and linking it to Make in India, the decision on FDI in railways and real estate and construction, but more importantly, railways and defense, clearly two bullets that the UPA could not bite because of internal contradictions. The way this decision was taken and the subsequent ministers who have been appointed to these two important portfolios seems to indicate that there is a lot of promise lying ahead. What do you make of it in the context of the Make in India program? Because again, the criticism of Make in India is that there aren't enough concrete details with regard to implementation that have been announced so far. Mr. Singh.
Yeah, let me, before I address your question directly, Rabi, let me just make one brief observation to a point made by Manish, my good friend, that he wanted me to wear my economist hat. But before I could do that, he has merely worn his legal hat in terms of wanting to twist something which I said by trying to attribute to me that I was giving the UPA credit for more than 8% rate of growth. I was not. I was pointing out that notwithstanding favorable domestic and exogenous circumstances, they missed a huge opportunity. I also agree with him that government today must be judged in real time. Yes, we are being judged on real time. One of the tests of any democratic government is how you do in terms of electoral outcomes. And election after election, state after state, the policies and programs of this government are being validated by a resounding electoral success. So if governments in democracy, there is one critical test, and that's the test of being able to sustain people's support, and that support seems to be strengthened as months go along. Now to your question, Sarabi. I think that on FDI in railway and defense, that's a huge quantum change. Manish should be fair enough to realize that on railways, for too long, India had suffered railway ministers who were in a populist mindset. That railways was something considered completely untouchable outside the scheme of things. In fact, I have written extensively on it that the rationale of having perhaps a separate railway budget is now over. Railway needs to be rejuvenated. Railway needs to move away from cross-subsidies in terms of which passenger and freight subsidies are being cross-subsidized. Railway deserves a fresh bout of investment, preferably foreign direct investment. And modernization of railways is something which needs foreign direct investment. That's a bullet which the Modi government has bought. In fact, the change of the railway ministry so soon and handing it over to somebody like Suresh Prabhu, known for his reform outlook, is an important step along with opening up of the FDI to 100% in railways, which I think will bring about a transformative change in a critical infrastructure in India. FDI in defense. I think FDI in defense on 49%, first of all, it was all closed if no private investment was coming. It's amazing how the 49% FDI has brought about a huge interest among foreign investors to collaborate with Indian investors to really, India, one of the biggest importers of arms, why not produce it in India, create jobs in India, create gainful opportunities in India. You link this up with the Make in India program and reviving India's manufacturing sector. And I agree with Doval that for the revival of the manufacturing sector, we are conscious we need to change labor laws, faster environment clearance, and faster approval processes. All the three were considered untouchables earlier. All the three are being dealt with in a manner which would bring about a transformative change in the way in which the manufacturing sector takes off in this country.
Okay, Shaurya, you wanted to come in and then I'll go across to Manish.
I will just add a little bit to what Mr. Singh was saying. Just as political success of a government is judged by its electoral outcomes, the economic success also of a government is judged among stakeholders by the confidence that the business community or the investment community has in the economic performance of the government. Now, if you go back by both those measures, which is the FII investment that is going into India, that has gone up from a net outflow for the same period last year of $6.7 billion to a net inflow into India of $26.7 billion.
So that's why the stock market is where it is.
But also in terms of substantive FDI investment, which in the same period has gone up from $7.4 billion last year to $12.8 billion. So as Mr. Singh was saying, just like there is a resounding success that this government is facing politically, even in terms of serious investor, the people who put their money where their mouth is, we're seeing this validation in the economy as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Manish. I don't know if you want to respond to that, because clearly the underlying point here is that the joke is that the last good railway minister that India had was a congressman, Mr. Madhav Rao Sindhya, and after that, in 10 years of your rule, you were hostage to allies who ran amok at the railways, and you now finally have a good man. But my question really was about the handling of the coal blocks matter, one of the biggest issues which will have a cascading impact on the banking system. MOS Finance Jayant Sinha yesterday telling Parliament that it is going to impact banks by close to 95,000 crore, something that was a legacy from the UPA government. What do you make of the manner in which the government has been handling that issue? Because inside the government, they say that this is a mess that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh himself should be held responsible for.
Well, let me deal with all the issues one by one. Insofar as FDI and defense is concerned, what was the earlier framework in FDI and defense? The framework was that 26% foreign investment was allowed, up to 49% it was on the FIPP route, and beyond 49% it was with the clearance of the CCS. In fact, as we speak, there were projects which were approved by the previous CCS. For example, the BrahMos project and various other projects where the foreign participation was actually more than 51%. So by tinkering with the regime, that is, rather than putting 49% or leaving it on the FIPP route and making it the automatic route, well, if this government thinks that it is going to attract investment, interest does not mean investment, then I wish it all the luck. Insofar as railways is concerned, well, I'm quite surprised that when this government was sworn in the May of 2014, they decided to appoint a gentleman called Mr. Gowda as the railway minister. At that point in time, the government wasn't thinking about the fact that railways, according to them, requires reform. 6 months down the line, they actually poach a person from the Shiv Sena, which actually speaks of a total lack of talent within their own ranks, and then appoint him as the railways minister. With no disrespect to Mr. Prabhu, let's wait and see as to what he comes out with in his railway budget to really, start hailing him or extolling him as a reformer. And number three, insofar as coal blocks are concerned, if you would recall, the policy structure with regard to coal blocks was the same from 1993 right up till 2009. And in 1993, Mr. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister, followed by Mr. Deva Gowda, followed by Mr. Gujral, followed by Mr. Vajpayee, then Mr. Vajpayee once again, and after that, Dr. Manmohan Singh. So therefore, if you are going to hold the political executive culpable, well, I think then the best thing to do is to start from 1993 and work your way upwards to 2009.
No, but my point really, Manish, was on the handling of that entire thing, and how that is one of the key legacies that will not just impact this government for 6 months, but for the rest of its tenure, and we'll keep a very close watch on that. Unfortunately, we have completely run out of time, and I wanted to
let me point out one more thing. Let me point out one more thing. Read the Supreme Court judgment, which cancelled the coal blocks. Is there a single stricture against any of the UPA ministers? The answer is no. So if the Supreme Court, after applying its mind to the entire issue, and it decided to cancel the coal blocks, if it would have found that there is any misdemeanor or indiscretion which has been committed, they would have commented about it. There is not a single stricture. Okay. Go read the Supreme Court judgment.
Okay, Manish. Sure, Manish, we will do that. And as we know, over yesterday, the court itself is reading a lot into some of the closure reports of the CBI, but that's not the subject for discussion. Quick 30 seconds to you, Mr. Singh, and final 30 seconds to Shaurya here. Your final remarks on this before we wrap the show. Mr. Singh.
Well, I think the government has made a very credible and a very decisive start under a very credible leadership. Economic and political indicators are very favorable. I think the performance at the end of 1 year will look even more glowing than it stands today.
Thank you very much. Shaurya, we didn't discuss national security. Quick last remarks on that, perhaps?
No, I'm not a person to, that's not my area. But I think what I'll just like to complete on is that from where Mr. Singh left, which is to say that I think there is some merit in hearing what the opposition and Mr. Tiwari is saying, that there has been a great start, good 180 days, but a lot of specific, dogged tactical actions that are still required need to be taken on infrastructure, banking, lowering the cost of capital, making India competitive. Right. I think the government should stay on track on those issues, right. and an opposition should hold the government responsible. But at the same time, I think we should keep measuring this government by its actual performance targets. So I'd be happy to come back in 6 months and see what it looks like.
Perhaps we'll do it much more closer than that. Thank you very much, Shaurya. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, Manish Tiwari, for your time. That's all we have on this edition of the Political Capital. We'll keep a very close watch on this government and how it does in the days ahead. And if you've been watching this show, thank you very much. Do continue watching. Thank you.